Take a deep, slow breath and let your shoulders drop away from your ears, allowing your body to sink comfortably into the surface beneath you. There is nowhere else you need to be right now, and nothing else you need to do other than to listen and to let your mind drift along the gentle current of a story from the quiet, dusted archives of our shared history. Tonight, we are going to explore a corner of the world that is usually hidden behind heavy oak doors and thick velvet curtains. We are going to wander through the silent hallways of the corporate past, to examine a phenomenon that sits at the curious intersection of finance, law, and the value of a human life. It is a topic known by a name that sounds almost like a line from a piece of old folklore, a phrase that seems to belong to a different century entirely. It is known as the Dead Peasant Insurance scandal. But before we unravel the complexities of this event, let us first imagine the setting. Picture, if you will, a vast, open-plan office from a few decades ago. The air is still, filled with the low, steady hum of ventilation systems and the soft, rhythmic clicking of typewriter keys or early computer keyboards. Dust motes dance in the shafts of afternoon sunlight that pierce through the blinds, illuminating the floating particles in a slow, hypnotic waltz. In this world of commerce, everything is recorded. Every transaction, every handshake, every promise is captured in ink on paper, filed away in metal cabinets that line the walls like silent sentinels. There is a certain comfort in this order, a sense that the world can be catalogued, measured, and insured against the unpredictable tides of fate. Insurance, at its heart, is a concept born of a desire for safety. It is a shield we raise against the unknown. We insure our homes, our vehicles, our health. It is a way of pooling our resources, a communal agreement that says, if the winds should turn against one of us, the many will be there to offer support. It is a dry, bureaucratic process, yet it rests on a foundation of care and protection. However, deep within the ledgers of large corporations, a different kind of calculation began to take shape in the latter half of the 20th century. It was a strategy born not of malice, but of cold, mathematical efficiency. It began with a concept known as insurable interest. In the eyes of the law, to buy an insurance policy on a person, you must have an interest in their continued well-being. A husband has an interest in his wife, a parent in a child, and a business, naturally, has an interest in its key leaders. If a visionary CEO or a brilliant inventor were to pass away, the company would suffer a financial loss. Therefore, it became standard practice for companies to purchase life insurance on these essential figures. This was known as key person insurance, a sensible, logical precaution. But then, the definitions began to stretch, expanding slowly, like a shadow lengthening in the late afternoon. It is curious to consider how a simple idea, intended for protection, can slowly transform when viewed through the lens of pure profit, losing its original shape until it becomes something else entirely. Financial architects, men and women in quiet rooms with calculators and spreadsheets, began to wonder where the line was drawn. If a company could insure a CEO, could they not also insure a manager? And if a manager, why not a supervisor? And if a supervisor, why not the person who stocked the shelves, or the person who swept the floors in the silence of the night? Thus began the practice that would later be colloquially termed Dead Peasant Insurance. The name itself is derived from the Russian novel Dead Souls by Nikolai Gogol, where a protagonist travels the countryside buying the rights to serfs who had died, to use them as collateral for a scheme. In the modern corporate version, the term peasant was a dark, internal shorthand for the rank-and-file employees, the thousands of individuals who made up the foundation of the corporate pyramid. Imagine, for a moment, the sheer scale of it. Thousands upon thousands of names, lists of people who came to work every day, punched a clock, did their tasks with diligence, and went home to their families. They were the cashiers, the drivers, the administrative assistants. And unbeknownst to them, in a headquarters perhaps hundreds of miles away, their names were being inscribed onto master policies, bundled together like sheaves of wheat. These policies were often referred to as COLI, corporate-owned life insurance. In this arrangement, the corporation was the beneficiary. If an employee passed away, the insurance payout would not go to the grieving family or to the children left behind. It would go quietly, seamlessly, into the corporate treasury. It was treated as tax-free income, a way to bolster the bottom line through the inevitability of mortality. Let your mind rest on the image of a single piece of paper, a policy document. It is crisp, white, covered in dense blocks of black text. It sits in a folder, one of many in a long row. It represents a wager of sorts, a financial instrument that turns a human life into an asset on a balance sheet. There is no emotion in the paper, no judgment. It simply exists, waiting for a condition to be met. The logic behind this was purely fiscal. In the 1980s and 1990s, the corporate world was shifting. There was a new focus on optimization, on finding value in every hidden corner of an organization. The tax laws at the time allowed for these policies to grow tax-free. Companies could borrow against the cash value of the policies, deducting the interest from their taxes. It was, in the eyes of the accountants, a perfect machine, a perpetual motion engine of finance, fueled by the lives of the workers. It is important to understand that in these early days, this was not done in the shadows of an alleyway, but in the bright, fluorescent-lit boardrooms of major banks and retail giants. It was recommended by consultants, stamped by legal teams, and approved by directors. It was business as usual. The silence surrounding it was not necessarily a silence of guilt, but the silence of the mundane. It was just another line item, another strategy to maximize shareholder value. Imagine walking through one of these large department stores, perhaps in the early evening, when the crowds have thinned. The floors are polished to a high shine, reflecting the rows of merchandise. You see a worker folding clothes, their movements practiced and calm. You see another organizing tools in the hardware section. The store is peaceful. There is a sense of normalcy. You would never guess, looking at this scene, that there is an invisible thread connecting these workers to a vault far away. A thread made of actuarial tables and mortality rates. The worker does not feel it. The shopper does not see it. It is a ghost in the machine of commerce. A secret kept not by whispering voices, but by the complexity of tax codes and the density of legal language. The sheer volume of these policies was staggering. Millions of employees across the nation were covered. Companies bought them in bulk, often without the employees' knowledge or consent. It was called janitor insurance by some, a nickname that highlights the disparity between the high-level financial engineering and the humble roles of the people being insured. The atmosphere of the time allowed this to flourish. It was an era of expansion, of mergers and acquisitions. The human element of business was often abstracted into data points. An employee was a cost, a resource, and now an investment vehicle. The distinctiveness of the individual, their laugh, their dreams, their morning coffee rituals, was dissolved into a statistic, a probability of survival. There is a profound stillness in realizing how easily the individual can be lost within the system, how a person can become a number without ever feeling the change occur. As we drift deeper into this story, we can see the heavy binders accumulating on the shelves. We can smell the ink and the toner. We can hear the scratch of the pen signing off on a broad-based policy. The intent was to fund employee benefits, to pay for health care and pensions. That was the justification. The death benefits of the few would pay for the retirement of the many. It was a utilitarian equation, balanced on a razor's edge of ethics. But for a long time, the water remained calm. The surface was undisturbed. The checks were written, the premiums were paid, and the system hummed along in its quiet, profitable loop. The families of the deceased simply did not know. When a loved one passed, they grieved. They managed their affairs, never suspecting that their loss had triggered a deposit in a corporate bank account, a silent transaction in a distant city. And so, the practice grew. It spread from industry to industry, from banks to energy companies, from telecommunications to grocery chains. It became a standard tool in the CFO's kit, a way to offset costs and manage liabilities. It was a secret hidden in plain sight, buried under layers of jargon and quarterly reports. As we prepare to move further into this narrative, let yourself visualize a library of these records, row upon row of files, stretching endlessly into the dim distance. It is a library of lives, commodified and stored. The air is cool and dry. The silence is absolute. It is a monument to a time when the line between a person and a product became blurred, softened by the allure of efficiency. In the next part of our journey, we will see what happens when the light begins to shine into these dark corners. We will explore the moment when the silence was broken and the families began to ask questions. But for now, simply rest in the quiet contemplation of this hidden world, this strange and silent chapter of our past, where the hum of the office fan was the only sound accompanying the signing of a name and the sealing of a fate. And so, time moves forward, as it always does. The hum of the fan fades, replaced by the turning of pages in a different setting. We leave the cool, dry air of the corporate archives and drift gently into the living rooms of ordinary homes. It is here, in the quiet, intimate spaces of daily life, that the next chapter of our story begins to unfold. Imagine a sunlit kitchen table, the morning light filtering through sheer curtains, casting long, soft shadows across a patterned tablecloth. Dust motes dance in the gentle beams, swirling in a slow, hypnotic rhythm. A stack of mail sits there, routine, mundane. It is the stuff of everyday existence: bills, catalogs, letters. But within that stack lies a revelation. It begins not with a shout, but with a whisper of confusion. We find ourselves in the early years of a new millennium. The digital age is dawning, but paper still holds the weight of truth. A widow, perhaps in Texas, or maybe a grieving son in Oklahoma, sits at this table. They are navigating the difficult geography of loss, sorting through the administrative debris that death leaves behind. It is a quiet, sorrowful task, accompanied only by the ticking of a wall clock and the settling of the house. In this stillness, a document surfaces. It might be a tax form that doesn't quite make sense, or an inadvertent letter from an insurance carrier. The words on the page are formal, detached. They speak of a policy, a payout, a beneficiary. The numbers are significant, often reaching into the hundreds of thousands of dollars. The mind struggles to align the reality of loss with the cold logic of this paperwork. The person they have lost, a husband who drove a truck, a mother who stocked shelves, a son who worked the night shift, did not hold this policy. They had no vast estate to protect, no golden parachute. And yet, here is the evidence. A policy exists, but the payout is not for the family. The money, the value assigned to this extinguished life, is destined for a corporate bank account hundreds of miles away. Let yourself feel the weight of that realization. It is a heavy feeling, a sinking sensation in the chest. It is the moment when the abstract concept of corporate efficiency collides with the tender reality of human grief. To realize that a life, so full of memories, of laughter, of struggle, was also a line item on a ledger somewhere far away. A bet placed on mortality, without the participant ever knowing the game was being played. This discovery was not an isolated incident. Like a single raindrop falling on a still, dark pond, the ripples began to spread. One family asked a question, and then another. The silence that had shrouded this practice for nearly 2 decades began to fracture, hairline cracks appearing in a fortress of solitude. Journalists, those quiet observers of the world's machinery, began to notice the pattern. In the plush, carpeted offices of major newspapers, specifically the Wall Street Journal, reporters began to pull at the thread. Imagine them, late at night, under the glow of a desk lamp. The rest of the city sleeps, but they are awake, sifting through public records, comparing names, tracing the flow of money. They found that this was not a matter of a few rogue policies. It was systemic. It was a vast, invisible web, connecting the heartbeat of the worker to the balance sheet of the employer. They discovered that major banks, household names in energy, and massive retail chains had all partaken in this silent wager. They found that in some cases, the companies held these policies long after the employee had left, long after the connection of employment had been severed. The revelation was a slow dawn, illuminating a landscape that many found surreal. Consider the story of a man who worked at a music store. A simple job, honest work, surrounded by the rhythms of melodies and the gloss of instruments. He passes away young, a tragedy that stops time for his family. And only then, in the quiet aftermath, do they learn that his life was insured for a sum that could have changed their entire destiny. Yet it was payable to the corporation. The disparity is striking. The geometry of it feels wrong to the human heart, like a chord played out of tune. As the news spread, it did not cause a panic, but rather a deep, collective introspection. It forced a question to be asked, a question that hung in the air like a heavy mist. Who owns a life? Who has the right to benefit from its end? The corporations, in their defense, spoke the language of logic. They spoke of insurable interest, a legal concept dating back centuries, designed to protect creditors. They argued that the loss of an employee, even a low-level one, carried a cost to the company. Recruitment, training, the disruption of the workflow. They viewed the insurance as a shield, a way to smooth out the financial waters. To them, it was not macabre. It was prudent. It was math. But to the families, and to the public that was slowly waking up to this reality, it felt like something else. It felt like a violation of a sacred boundary. The narrative then moved from the kitchen tables and the newsrooms into the solemn, wood-paneled halls of the courts. Visualize this change of scenery. The air here is thick with history and dust. The benches are hard, polished by years of waiting. The only sounds are the scratching of pens, the rustling of robes, and the low murmur of legal arguments. Lawsuits began to drift through the system, slow and methodical, like a great ship turning in a harbor. Families sought not just compensation, but acknowledgement. They wanted to reclaim the ownership of their loved one's memory. They wanted to sever the invisible financial tether that still bound the deceased to the company. One by one, the cases were heard. The camel's nose discussed in the boardrooms of the 1980s had now fully entered the tent, and the world was watching. We saw cases involving large retailers, companies that employed hundreds of thousands of people. It was revealed that they had taken out policies on a massive scale, colloquially referred to as janitor's insurance in the press, though the industry preferred the term corporate-owned life insurance. The details were staggering in their volume, yet numbing in their bureaucracy. Spreadsheets listing thousands of names, dates of birth, dates of death, benefit amounts, a library of lives, commodified and stored, now laid open for the judge and jury to see. During these proceedings, the human element constantly clashed with the corporate structure. Witnesses would speak of their loved ones, of their hobbies, their favorite songs, the way they took their coffee. And the defense would speak of tax codes, of aggregate funding, of actuarial tables. It was a dialogue between two different languages, two different ways of perceiving the world. And yet, amidst this conflict, there was a strange calmness. The legal process is slow. It requires patience. It requires a suspension of immediate judgment. As we observe this from our distance, we can see it not as a battle, but as a necessary unraveling. The secrets were being brought into the light, not to be burned, but to be understood. The courts had to decide, at what point does a company's interest in an employee end? Does it end when they hand in their badge? Does it end when they retire? Or does it persist, a ghostly claim, until the very end of days? States began to look closer. Legislators, sitting in their high-backed chairs, began to draft new words, new rules. The outrage was not fiery. It was a slow burn, a steady pressure building against the dam of established practice. The term "dead peasant," once a piece of clever internal jargon, became a symbol of a philosophy that had perhaps gone too far, drifted too far from the shore of ethical norms. As we rest here, in the middle of this story, let us pause to consider the complexity of it all. It is easy to paint villains and victims, but the reality is a tapestry of gray. It is a story of a system designed for efficiency, running on autopilot, until it collided with the values of the people it was meant to serve. The silence of the archives has been broken. The files are open. The families know. The secret is out. But the resolution, the changing of the tide, that is yet to come. For now, simply breathe in the awareness of this moment, the moment when the hidden machinery was exposed, and the world paused to look at the gears, turning slowly, quietly, in the heart of the economy. Let the image of the courtroom fade. Let the wood paneling soften into the shadows. Return to the feeling of the sunlit room, the dust mote still dancing, indifferent to the laws of men. The story continues, flowing like a river towards the sea, carrying with it the hopes of those who sought to reclaim the dignity of the departed. Rest in this space between discovery and resolution. The air is still. The questions hang suspended, waiting for an answer. And as we prepare to move to the final chapter, we carry with us the knowledge that even the deepest secrets eventually find their way to the light. And as that light spreads, soft and golden, it illuminates the turning of the tide. We often think of change as a sudden, thunderous event, a storm that breaks the heat of the day. But true change, the kind that restores the balance of things, often arrives quietly. It comes like the slow shift of a shadow across a sundial, imperceptible in the second, yet undeniable in the hour. The revelation of these policies, the exposure of the Dead Peasant label, did not tear the world apart. Instead, it began to knit it back together, stitch by careful stitch. The outrage that had flared in the hearts of the families began to cool into something more durable, something like resolve. The legal battles, which had seemed so daunting, so full of sharp edges and cold language, began to soften into resolution. Imagine, if you will, the long corridors of power where these decisions were once made. Picture the boardrooms with their heavy oak tables, the glass towers touching the clouds. For years, the ink flowed in one direction, signing policies that turned lives into line items, transforming the heartbeat of a worker into the cold calculation of an asset. But now, watch as the pen pauses. Watch as the hand hesitates. The awareness of the world, the collective gaze of a society that remembered its values, acted like a gentle weight upon those pens. The practice began to retreat. It did not vanish in a blink, but it receded, like a high tide pulling back from the shore, leaving the sand smooth and cleansed. Major corporations, names that are woven into the fabric of daily commerce, began to announce the end of these programs. They spoke of changing times, of evolving standards. But beneath the corporate language, there was a simpler truth. The human spirit had asserted itself against the ledger. The dignity of the individual, no matter their station, had proven to outweigh the efficiency of the tax break. In the year 2006, the laws themselves began to shift. It was a quiet evolution, written into the pages of the Pension Protection Act. There were no parades, no fireworks lighting the night sky, just the scratching of pens on paper, the quiet murmur of agreement in the halls of Congress. A new boundary was drawn. A protective circle was cast around the employee. The new rules were simple, yet profound in their humanity. They spoke of consent. They spoke of notice. They declared that a company could not secretly bet on the life of its worker, that a person's mortality was not a commodity to be traded in the shadows. To hold such a policy, one would now need to ask, to look the person in the eye and ask for permission. And in that requirement, the secrecy evaporated. For who among us, when asked if we wish to be worth more dead than alive to our employer, would not pause? The transparency brought the practice to a natural, quiet close. Let your mind rest on that concept, the restoration of consent. It is a returning of power to its rightful place. It is the handing back of the name, from the cold file of the insurance giant to the warm keeping of the family. The lawsuits, too, found their endings. Settlements were reached, not with the bang of a gavel, but with the quiet shuffling of papers. Checks were written, funds were transferred. And while money can never replace a lost loved one, while currency can never truly weigh against the value of a memory, these settlements served a different purpose. They were an acknowledgement. They were a tangible admission that a line had been crossed, and that the crossing had been marked. The term dead peasant, an echo from a feudal past that had no place in the modern world, began to fade from the lexicon. It became a relic, a dusty footnote in the history of business ethics, a cautionary tale told in law schools and ethics seminars. It lost its power to hurt, and became instead a reminder of vigilance, a reminder that efficiency must never be the only God we serve. Now, visualize the archives again. Those rows and rows of filing cabinets we imagined earlier. The metal drawers are closed now. The dust is settling. The frantic searching is over. The secrets have been aired, and the air has been cleared. The heavy doors of that imaginary room are closing, locking not to hide the truth, but to signify that the chapter is finished. The story is told. The families, the widows in Texas, the children in Oklahoma, the workers in Ohio, they can rest now. The question marks that hung over their loved ones' legacies have been straightened into periods. The end of the sentence. The end of the doubt. Breathe in deeply now, drawing the air down into the bottom of your lungs, and release it slowly, letting your shoulders drop. Let the tension of the story drain away, just as the tension of the scandal drained out of the courts. What remains is a sense of peace, a sense of order restored. Think of the workers now, not as assets, not as numbers, but as they truly were. See them in the soft focus of memory, the nurse walking the halls at night, bringing comfort, the clerk stocking the shelves, keeping the community fed, the artist, the driver, the gardener. They are no longer defined by an insurance policy. They are defined by the love they left behind, by the work of their hands, by the laughter they shared. Their names belong to them again. The sun is setting on this narrative. Imagine the light in that dusty room turning from gold to a deep, restful indigo. The shadows lengthen, stretching out like a comfortable blanket over the floor. The dust motes settle, coming to rest on the floorboards. Everything is still. The machinery of the economy continues to turn, for the world must go on. But it turns with a little more humanity now. It hums a softer tune. The gears are greased with a little more respect. And we, the observers of this history, can take comfort in that small, quiet victory. Let the image of the courtroom, the office, the files, completely dissolve. Let them melt away like mist in the morning sun. You are left only with the feeling of safety, the feeling of being grounded, the knowledge that truth, eventually, rises to the surface like a cork in water. It cannot be held down forever. You are safe here. In this moment. In this quiet space you have created for yourself. The complexities of the law, the intricacies of finance, they are far away. They are distant murmurs in a city that is miles behind you. Here, there is only the rhythm of your own breathing, the slow, steady rise and fall of your chest. Everything has a season, a time to be hidden, and a time to be revealed, a time for conflict, and a time for peace. We have moved through the conflict. We have witnessed the revelation. And now, we reside in the peace. Allow your mind to drift, like a leaf floating on a slow-moving stream, drifting past the banks of the story we have just told, drifting toward a wide, calm ocean of sleep. There are no more details to remember. No more facts to process. The ledger is closed. The book is shut. The light is clicked off. Feel the weight of your body sinking into the surface beneath you. The day is done. The history is written. All that is left is the velvety darkness of rest. The silence around you is not empty. It is full of potential. It is a protective cloak, just like the laws that now protect the dignity of the worker. You are covered. You are secure. As we reach the end of our journey together, let the final echoes of the words fade. Let them become nothing more than a gentle vibration in the air, soothing and low. The Dead Peasant scandal is a thing of the past, a lesson learned, a course corrected. And you are here, in the present, alive, aware, and ready for sleep. Drift now, deeper and deeper, into the quiet, into the calm, into the restorative night. Rest, sleep.